So, you've just jumped into the world of Talara after creating your character and picking your class. Rift's introductory tutorial is alright, but it can certainly be better, and so I am making this video to help bridge that gap. I've gathered some frequent questions I've observed from newer players of Rift and MMOs in general who might be experiencing frustrations to hopefully answer them here. So, let's not waste time and start with the first section. Movement is a key aspect in games, and Rift's movement feels unique amongst other MMOs. You walk around using WASD, or alternatively click to move in the settings, and the camera follows where your character is pointing. I think the key here to unlocking more freedom and fluency in your movements of your character is realizing that the right mouse button, when held, will allow you to rotate your camera or keep it where it is facing while moving your character. I mention this because by default, Q and E are bound to strafe, and I personally have found little use for them as movement keys and better used as quick keybinds for your hotbar. This same strafe can be accomplished by holding right-click and pressing either A or S, which personally feels more natural to myself. By using your mouse to look around, you can turn your character much faster than using A or D or Q or E. In future environments, such as raids or dungeons, being able to swivel around and take in all the information around you may be critical to your success. Moving on, Rift is an MMORPG, and for those that are not familiar, that means you use spells and abilities to do damage to your enemies. Rift's tutorial teaches you to right-click an enemy to engage them, but this is incredibly inefficient and very slow. So Rift gives you spells to use that are significantly more powerful and can be started out of combat so you can get the jump on your enemies. These spells are placed on your hotbar and are keybound initially to numbers 1 through 9. We learned in the first section that you may have just freed up 2 more additional keybinds that are most likely much easier to hit than any number past 5 or 6 on your keyboard. As you play, you may find yourself gaining significantly more spells than seems reasonable, and this is because Rift's combat system has become macro-based. Macros will be briefly covered in a later part of this video. This number of spells also leads into a rotation where you may notice some abilities synergize well before or after others. For example, mages playing Harbinger will realize that they get a buff that makes their next cast time spell an instant cast. So following that, you should probably choose your most powerful spell to use after that proc instead of a simpler ability. Lastly, you may notice that there is a time after using a spell that you cannot use another. This is called the global cooldown, or GCD. Your GCD is dependent on your class. Rogues and primalists have 1-second GCDs. Warriors, clerics, and mages have 1.5 second GCDs. There are some instances where your GCD can be changed, but overall, these times are most likely set in stone. I mentioned you will be getting abilities and spells, but from where? You most likely didn't feel like you did anything besides level up and click a button, but now you are gaining abilities. Where are these coming from? This part is difficult to understand, so I'm going to do my best here to make it clearer and hopefully not to add to more confusion. New players, when creating their character, are given a choice between pre-built specs in Rift. You probably just chose the one that had a sword icon or a cool name without realizing what that meant. If you press N on your keyboard, it opens your soul tree. This is where you spend your talent points, which you gain periodically through levels. It is a combination of 3 trees called souls that form your spec. Each soul specializes in a specific role. For example, tank, support, single target healing, AoE damage, or single target damage. You can have any mix and match of 3 of these souls. For example, you could have a leveling spec that has a single target damage, single target healing, and tank soul to become entirely self-sufficient in the open world. You can have a tank spec that has a tank, support, and AoE healing soul to help out your healer or buffing your party members. When you choose a spec at the start, it shows a pre-selected of these 3 trees and will automatically spend points in them as you level to ease new players into the intense customization that is the Soul Tree system. It can be easily stopped though. Just click close on the predetermined roles menu, or spend a point somewhere manually and confirm that you want to deviate from the automatic role, and it will leave you be. Spending time deciding on what talents you may want seems great, but what if you want to change to a different role without having to delete what you've already done? Well, you can buy role slots which save your current build and switch between those different role slots on the fly out of combat. To find all of your spells and abilities, press P, and they will be under each soul. One of the last things to mention here is that the soul that has the most points in it is what your overall role will be flagged as, meaning that if you want to queue as a tank for a dungeon, you need to have one role saved that has more points in the tank soul than others. Otherwise, Rift won't let you queue as a tank. That was meant to be the meat of the introduction, since Rift builds around the Soul Tree and the rest of the systems are a fair bit easier to understand. For example, the map and quest system. M is for your map and will show you the current region you are in. Right-clicking on the map sets a personal waypoint. L opens your quest book, which contains all your quests. You might notice at the bottom 3 categories. From left to right, they are Carnage quests, regular quests, and daily quests. Each has a limit of 30 at a time. The latter 2 I imagine are self-explanatory, but Carnage quests are fairly unique to Rift. Essentially, they are quests you can find in the open world that are simple kill quests on mobs. These have been moved from traditional quest givers into the mobs themselves, and are automatically accepted and completed and turned in without you having to visit any NPC. At the bottom of the quest menu is the quest inventory, which holds all quest items, that way you don't accidentally trash them from your inventory. Speaking of quest items, some quests require you to use an item on a mob or use an item in a specific location. These quests are indicated because the icon of the quest ability appears in the quest log. All you have to do is click the icon under the correct circumstances and it should work. If it doesn't appear to be working, check the red error text that appears. For example, some quest items are tricky and require you to use an item on a mob in the last 30% of its health. We're chewing through the fundamentals quickly. I'm proud of you for making it this far, and there is only a little bit left to go. Next up is the character menu. When pressing C, you may be immediately overwhelmed by what everything is or does, and more menus will unlock the further your character progresses. I'll use my max level as an example that may have more menus than you have unlocked right now, and I will quickly go down the list in brief summary. The character tab is where all of your equipable armor is shown. You can hover over each slot to see a filtered view of what can be equipped in each slot from your inventory. The stats page shows all the information about numerics on your character. This is really only useful when building your character in endgame, when you are looking for a specific number to hit for before speccing into something else. Planar fragments and fragment inventory are an endgame system. Down the road, your gear and the secondary statistics such as attack power, spell power, crit power, etc. are separated from your gear, and instead you progress through the planar fragment system to gain those stats back. Skills is where you can see the progress of your crafting professions as well as fishing and survival, 2 professions that are given to every player. Instances show your instance lockout timers. Each raid or dungeon has an actual portal entrance in the world. Dungeons have a daily lockout. Raids have a weekly lockout. If queuing for dungeons, you can run the same dungeon without worrying about lockout. However, if you want to enter it through the portal in the world, you may only do that once per day. Currencies shows all your currencies in game, including event currencies, store currencies, and smaller token currencies. Notoriety shows your reputation for the various factions throughout the game. There is no negative reputation, so you can be loved by everyone. Artifacts are little shiny collectibles across the world. You collect a set of them to complete an artifact set, which will give you varying rewards. You turn in the artifact sets in your capital city. Mounts shows all your current collected mounts. You can drag these to your hotbar and keybind them. I usually have mine keybound to middle mouse. Books are more collectible in-game items that expand on the lore. They serve no real purpose outside of a few quests that require you to read up on the lore of the game to answer some questions in the quest. Wardrobe and appearance sets are your decor for your character. When you collect an item in-game, you have that wardrobe appearance forever, many of which can be dyed. Appearance sets show your progression in-game to obtaining all the armor sets, similar to artifact sets. Companions are little summonable friends that keep you company on your adventures. Some do have actual uses, such as the shiny artifact ball, which periodically poops out artifacts. Lastly, are titles. You can have a prefix and a suffix on your in-game name. You can also purchase a last name scroll, so you can have some ridiculously long names in Rift. Most of these are earned through achievements in holiday events. The Rift Store. Opened with the right bracket, may initially look like a cash shop, but it is far more powerful than it lets on to be, despite the pitiful attempt at a few quests trying to convey that information. The Rift Store can be better described as a mobile shopkeeper that holds almost everything purchasable from merchants across the game world, while also having cash shop items. This means that you can sell stuff from your inventory at any time to the Rift Store. The Rift Store has all crafting materials and most recipes for your professions. It has most purchasable armor sets during leveling. It contains all the raid gear you purchase at endgame, has all the mounts available to purchase as you level, and 1,000 more things that I can't list for the sake of the length of this video. The best I can offer is to spend time clicking through the menus. I mentioned macros earlier in the guide because they are a tricky topic since you are somewhat coding your own routine of abilities into the game, and the syntax is initially tricky to understand. I want to make a more in-depth video in the future because there is a lot to unpack and some really cool features to show. So, here is a brief crash course on macros. You start with naming the macro. Then your first line should usually be #show, and then the ability name that you want the icon of the macro to be. This will also show the tooltip of the spell when hovering over the macro. Save your changes and drag the icon to your hotbar. Next, you type cast and the ability name you want to cast. Capitalization does not matter. Rift will sequentially run down this list each time you press the macro button on your hotbar. Because it checks sequentially, an ability that displays instant cast with no cooldown needs to be placed at the bottom of the list. Otherwise, the macro will see the ability, see that it is off cooldown because it never has a cooldown, and use it without using any other ability below it. An example would be using your long cooldown abilities in the macro first, and then at the bottom of the macro, put the ability that you want to spam. This can consolidate many spells from your hotbar down to a single button. And that concludes the structured part of this introduction. This last section is about smaller tips and tricks I can offer in bullet list format. All crafting professions matter at endgame in differing ways. If you want the most money potential gain, however, then the 3 gathering professions, mining, foraging, and butchering are your best bet. You can purchase crafting extensions until you have every profession in the game on one character, otherwise you are initially limited to 3. Every class can do every role, depending on if you have the soul for it. Some of these souls are behind a paywall. For example, behind a paywall, rogues can heal, mages can tank, warriors can heal, and clerics can support. Primalists are entirely behind a paywall. Take your time leveling to understand your character. If you have a high level boost, save it for an alt when you are more experienced with the game. Jumping right into the end game is an incredible amount of catch up to do instantly, with little guide on what to do. To build on that, at endgame every class is needed, and you can stand out as an exceptional player if you are willing to put the time into learning rotations, practicing damage, and working on gearing your character. And there we have it, a complete introduction to the foundations of Rift. You can check out my other video about more beginner information about Rift as well, and if you are a more endgame player, I have a guide on how to gear for the endgame raids. Until then, I've been Nino, and I hope to see you in Talara.